The vast mansion on the edge of the hill stood cold and quiet, its glass walls reflecting a sky heavy with clouds. Inside, every corner was spotless, every surface shining, but there was no laughter, no warmth, and no sign of life except for a small boy sitting by the window with his crutches beside him. That boy was Ethan, only 7 years old, and since his mother's death, he hadn't smiled once. His father, Alexander Grant, was one of the richest men in the city, a powerful, polished CEO whose name was printed on skyscrapers and newspapers alike. But for all his success, Alexander was losing the one thing that mattered most, his son. He didn't know how to reach Ethan anymore. The boy barely spoke, barely ate, and spent most of his time staring out at the garden where his mother used to play with him. Doctors, therapists, and specialists had come and gone, all promising to help Ethan heal. None had succeeded. So Alexander did what he did best. He worked harder, buried himself in business, and convinced himself that time would fix everything. He hired the most expensive staff to take care of his son, thinking money could buy peace. But Ethan stayed the same, silent, distant, and lost. When the latest nanny quit, Alexander's assistant arranged for a temporary caretaker until another professional could be found. That caretaker was Lila, a young woman from a small town, with no fancy degrees or certifications, just a kind heart and determination to help. She arrived quietly one rainy morning, dressed simply but with warmth in her eyes that made even the butler pause. The staff whispered among themselves that she wouldn't last a week. After all, the boy never spoke to anyone. But Lila wasn't afraid of silence. Her first morning in the mansion, she found Ethan sitting on the floor of his playroom, surrounded by untouched toys. "Hi," she said softly, kneeling down beside him. No response. "You know," she continued, "when I was little, I used to build castles out of blocks. But mine always fell down." Still nothing. She smiled and picked up one of his toy blocks, balancing it carefully. "Maybe you can show me how to build one that stays up." He didn't look at her. Not that day. But the next morning, she found that the blocks were stacked, clumsily, imperfectly, but stacked nonetheless. And that was enough for her to know that something had changed. Days turned into weeks. Lila talked to him, told him stories about her village, about her late father who taught her that kindness could rebuild even broken hearts. Slowly, Ethan began to listen. Then one afternoon, as she hummed softly while folding his clothes, she heard a faint sound behind her, a laugh. A real laugh. She turned around, her heart pounding, and saw Ethan smiling faintly at a silly face she had drawn on his shirt with chalk. It was the first time in 2 years he had smiled. The mansion began to change too. Where there had once been silence, now there were sounds, music, laughter, footsteps in the garden. Ethan began to walk short distances on his crutches, encouraged by Lila's patient cheer. The other staff noticed and whispered that it was like watching spring return after a long winter. But none of this reached Alexander. He was always away, traveling for meetings, closing deals, sending money home, but never his presence. He didn't know that while he was gone, the woman he had hired for temporary help was healing his son's heart in ways no doctor ever could. He didn't know that she spent nights reading to Ethan, that she cried silently the first time he said, "Good night, Lila." One evening, when Ethan took his first full step without help, she clapped her hands in pure joy, tears spilling down her face. "You did it, Ethan. You really did it," she cried. And for the first time, he ran, or rather stumbled, forward and hugged her tightly. That night, as Lila tucked him into bed, Ethan looked up and whispered, "Will Daddy ever come home?" She froze. "I think he will," she said softly, brushing his hair back. "And when he does, he'll see how brave you've been." Lila didn't know that the next morning, her words would come true. It was an ordinary morning for the mansion, except for one thing: Alexander Grant came home unannounced. His jet landed hours before schedule, and he decided not to inform anyone. He wanted to see things for himself, to witness the house without the usual pretenses of staff prepared for his arrival. As his car rolled up the driveway, Alexander felt the old ache in his chest. He hadn't been home for almost 2 months. Guilt gnawed at him every time he thought of his son, but he told himself he was working for Ethan's future. Still, the image of his boy's sad eyes haunted him. He stepped out of the car, briefcase in hand, expecting the same heavy silence. But what he heard instead made him stop in his tracks. Laughter. He blinked, thinking he imagined it. But no, it was clear, light, and real. The sound of a child laughing, echoing through the courtyard. He followed the sound around the corner, and there, by the garden fountain, he saw something that made his breath catch in his throat. His Ethan, was standing on his crutches, smiling. The little boy's golden hair glowed in the morning sun, and beside him knelt a young woman in a maid's uniform, cheering him on. She was clapping her hands, encouraging him to walk one more step. "You can do it. Just one more, Ethan," she said, her voice filled with warmth. Alexander couldn't move. He stood there, frozen, watching his son laugh for the first time in years. The boy's joy was radiant, contagious, and raw. He had never seen him like that, not even before his wife passed away. His eyes welled up, his heart pounding with disbelief and emotion. The boy stumbled forward, nearly losing his balance, but Lila caught him gently and steadied him. "That's it. See. You're stronger than you think," she said softly. Ethan beamed up at her, proud and happy. Alexander took a shaky breath and stepped forward. "Ethan." Both of them turned. Ethan froze for a moment, eyes wide, unsure how to react. Then, slowly, he smiled again, hesitant but real. "Daddy," he whispered. Alexander dropped his briefcase and rushed to him, falling to his knees and wrapping his son in his arms. "Oh, God. Ethan," he choked out, his voice breaking. "You're smiling, you're really smiling." The boy laughed softly. "Lila helped me, Daddy. She made me brave." Alexander looked up at Lila, his vision blurred with tears. She stood there, her eyes glistening, a shy smile on her lips. For the first time in years, Alexander didn't see a maid, he saw the person who had done what no one else could. "Thank you," he whispered. "You did what money, doctors, and I never could." Lila shook her head gently. He just needed someone to believe in him again. That night, the mansion was no longer silent. They had dinner together for the first time as a family. Ethan talked more than Alexander had ever heard him talk before, about the stories Lila told, about the games they played, about his dreams of walking without crutches one day. Alexander listened, smiling through tears. Later, after putting Ethan to bed, Alexander found Lila in the garden, looking at the stars. "You've changed my son's life," he said softly. "And you've changed mine too." She turned to him, startled. "I only did what anyone with a heart would do." He smiled sadly. "No, you did what I should have done. You reminded him how to smile. And you reminded me what truly matters." From that day on, Alexander didn't travel as often. He spent mornings walking with Ethan, evenings reading together, and every night thanking Lila silently for bringing his son, and himself, back to life. Months later, when Ethan finally took his first unaided step, Alexander wept openly, holding his son close while Lila watched with tears in her eyes. The once lonely mansion was now filled with laughter, love, and light. And sometimes, when Alexander watched Lila and Ethan together, he realized something profound, that the richest man in the world wasn't the one with the biggest company, but the one whose family had learned to smile again. And as the final scene fades, a gentle narrator's voice says, "Sometimes, miracles don't come from wealth or power, they come from kindness, patience, and love." If this story touched your heart, don't forget to subscribe for more heartwarming stories that remind us what truly matters: family, hope, and the power of compassion.